Greetings, folks, and welcome to the Electromaker Show. This is your roundup of all things maker and embedded and lovely. And today we have a very special show because I had the pleasure of interviewing Zach Supalla yesterday. He is the CEO of Particle, who, if you're not familiar with them, make everything from hardware right up to a web interface. They are basically IoT from end to end, whether you're a hobbyist or an industrial user, and they are launching a wonderful 5G SBC on Kickstarter, which has the guts of a modern smartphone or tablet. It uses a Qualcomm Snapdragon chip, but it runs Linux on top of it, and they've done all the work to make it work like a normal SBC. I chatted with Zach for quite a while about the Tachyon and about the whole idea behind Particle, and it was a really fun conversation, so I'm looking forward to showing that to you right now in the show today. We'll also go over the Tachyon briefly so you can see the Kickstarter and decide whether you'd like to back it. And in this week's show, we're also going to be talking about our product of the week, which is the Blues LoRaWAN Starter Kit. Those of you who've been watching the show for a while know how much I really like the Blues workflow. They've made it so all of their devices are very easy to get up and started with, and you can work with any host MCU or computer you want, because essentially it entirely works using JSON commands. Another company who are trying to take all of the kinks and difficulties of spooling up your own gear. So with that and several other things to get through, we should probably get on with the show. We're going to start this week's show by talking about the Particle Tachyon and going straight into the Zach Supalla interview. I wanted to very quickly preface it just by saying the Tachyon is a 5G single board computer. It runs Android hardware under the hood, so you have an octa-core Qualcomm Cryo chip, which is the same kind of thing you would find in a smartphone or a tablet, but Qualcomm have really been working to get upstream Linux support, and Particle have met them halfway to really make this a full-on Linux experience, but on hardware that you wouldn't normally expect. It has 5G out of the box, as you might imagine. It has an AI accelerator thanks to the same things that fit inside your phone. It has a certain amount of TOPS of AI stuff. And as you can see from this GIF, you have a Raspberry Pi hat attachment, camera attachment, a battery attachment, and everything else can be attached via a USB-C hub. Other than that, the only other thing you should know if you are not at all familiar with Particle, Zach does go through it to an extent in the interview, but they started around 10 years ago, and they have been making hardware and software and cloud solutions as one ever since, improving it over the years. I have a Particle Photon board, which was an IoT connected board, and you could say it's in the same vein as something like an ESP32 or something. It's a board with a microcontroller on it and connectivity, but where Particle have always excelled is in their cloud side of things. It started off with just a cloud browser and an API, and it slowly turned into an entire IoT service, as much as I found out that Zach is actually the person who I was thinking of who hates the term IoT, as do I. The Internet of Things is way too vague. But Particle has spent the last 10 years really perfecting this cloud from hardware right up to telemetry and over-the-air updates as a service thing for millions and millions of users. They have government contracts in the US. And I think that's all we really need to know running into this interview. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass you over to me and Zach talking yesterday. We had a quick interview about the Tachyon and talked about a few other things as well. So, folks, I am joined by Zach Supalla. He is the CEO of Particle. Do I have that right? You are the CEO, right?
Yep, that's right.
Lovely, yep. And he's here to talk about, well, various things. But let's begin where we left off on the last Electromaker show, which was we looked at the Kickstarter for the Particle Tachyon, a 5G-enabled single-board computer that runs Linux, but has much of the same guts, as it were, as a modern smartphone or tablet. So, Zach, Particle has been around for quite some time. I mentioned to you before the call started, I've got an original Photon sitting around somewhere from back in the day when I played with it, but a lot has happened since then. So how do you get from Particle beginning to putting out a quite unique single board computer?
Yeah, absolutely. So Particle's been around for about 10 years, and our business has always been some version of saying, you want to build IoT stuff, we can make that easier. Now, IoT stuff is inherently a very, very messy and broad thing, because IoT is not an industry. It's 750 industries that all got like lumped together. And within that, there's like massive big categories. So that's it's more complicated than that. The history of the business has been in microcontrollers, which we sort of think of as like a subset of IoT, right? If you're building an internet connected thing, what that means is you're connecting something to the internet that isn't a PC or a smartphone. And there's a lot of different subcategories. Some of those are like sensors and controls. And if it's a sensor or control based system, then you're probably thinking microcontrollers, real-time operating systems, And so Particle has been in the business of making it easy to make connected microcontroller-based products. And that is used in methane emissions monitoring in oil and gas. It's used in hot tubs. It's used in air conditioners. It's used in we track lobster boats for the state of Maine, like a surprisingly high variety of things. And our business is selling our platform to companies who are doing that at scale. But the way people find out about us, begin to use us, is development kits. And so we started with the Spark Core back in 2013, Kickstarter campaign for a Wi-Fi development kit. And then we've sort of been growing and expanding what we do ever since. The Spark Core was a STM32F103. So that was a processor that had 10 kilobytes of RAM, a whopping 128 kilobytes of flash, I want to say. And so we began, and what at the time was like incredibly constrained systems, where we had to figure out how we're doing like encrypted communications and all this stuff that didn't fit into that little tiny processor. And so then we're on our 4th generation of microcontroller based products now, so that the world's changed. So now it's like, 200 megahertz Cortex M33s with like 4 megabytes of RAM. And it is amazing when you start with 10 kilobytes that feels like infinite resources. And there's a point where you start to hit the ceiling of microcontrollers, where you say, once you hit some point, you really should be flipping over into microprocessors, into like the lower end of that system. And so we've been thinking this for a while. Like, we're going to come up on the ceiling and we're going to start to look at ways we could support people with like EdgeML and video and audio and the things that are always a little more difficult to do in microcontrollers, and also writing code in other programming languages and robotics and drones and so on and so forth. And so we came up to the ceiling of microcontrollers and we said, now's the time. But we also decided we don't want to just make another Raspberry Pi, right? Raspberry Pi has done a great job of building an incredible ecosystem around single board computers. Where we see opportunity is in taking higher end technologies that have more processing power, more capabilities, and really combining that for things like robotics and computer vision and things that require kind of like heavier processors and bigger workloads. And so we work closely with folks at Qualcomm and realize there's a big opportunity to basically take like Snapdragon tech, which is the stuff that's in a smartphone these days, and use that to create a 5G connected single board computer that's very powerful, has a DSP for accelerated AI and ML models. And so that's Tachyon. It's a smartphone in the form of a Raspberry Pi. Basically, it's I like to say it's a 5G AI IoT SBC. That's my infinite acronym of what this product is.
Excellent. Yeah. And one of the things that I think will be a bit of a breath of fresh air to a lot of folks, because there's been, as you say, there's very little point making another Raspberry Pi these days, as that kind of board has been done beautifully by Raspberry Pi and done in similar ways but different by a plethora of different companies who have come up with very different fruit Pi. You know what I mean?
Right.
And of course, there are some working, moving towards RISC-V and all that kind of stuff. What I found particularly exciting is that there are, of course, Android development kits out there, but they will cost you a pretty penny, which are using similar kind of tech. And there are, of course, single board computers that will run Android, but this is very much the opposite way around. Because one of the first things I thought, before I really knew anything about Tachyon, I just saw that it was, Snapdragon and Qualcomm. I thought, does that mean I'm going to have to know how to develop things specifically for that platform? But you've got upstream. I mean, the basic kind of stock operating system for it is desktop Ubuntu 24.2 or something like that, isn't it? It's actually a full upstream Linux.
Yep, that's right. We get to benefit. We're benefiting from the fact that Qualcomm, who has historically done, they've done what they need to do on like complying with the Linux GPL thing license, and they sort of distribute the Linuxes that they create, but they've never upstreamed before. And so they have started to make a push into making their products more accessible and friendly for developers, which is great because we can piggyback off of that, where they're now upstreaming Linux support. Not something we could have done. The fact that that's the case means it's now possible to build a really great high quality Linux experience around these products, where previously it really was sort of Android or bust. You technically could do Linux or like a Windows 11 kind of a thing, but you were not going to have a good experience doing that. And so the bits and pieces are there. And I think in a lot of ways, IoT is taking bits and pieces of technology that were probably designed for other purposes and then reusing them in a way that makes it possible to build new categories of products. That's sort of how I think about the market. And this is a bunch of pieces that were designed for smartphones that have been sufficiently repackaged and reoriented into something that could in principle be used for IoT, but there's still a lot of warts and hair on the bits and pieces. And so that's where we come in, is like taking all this stuff and assembling it into a really great product experience that works out of the box, very seamless, really well designed for prototyping and building hobbyist projects, but also designed to deploy product at scale with over-the-air software updates and security and all the things that you would require if you're not just thinking about one single tachyon that you're going to put somewhere, but a fleet of them that are going to go do something out in the world.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think this leads us quite nicely actually onto the other side of what Particle do, because I talked about this in our recent show, and I'll when I edit this, I'll throw an image of the Tachyon up on the screen so I can show people this. From a hardware perspective, we are looking at something which is your kind of credit card sized single board computer, and it has the ubiquitous 40-pin hat. It has a couple of camera connectors, and everything else can be achieved via is it 2 USB-C ports, which can do everything from DisplayPort to audio, all of that kind of stuff.
Yep, that's right.
So from a hardware perspective, it's fairly well set to do anything another single board computer would do. But for a long time now, Particle has been offering an online system, browser-based system for fleet management, over-the-air updates, a whole plethora of things, which now is something I think people are very used to. There's a lot of people offering that service, but Particle have been offering it for really quite a long time. That came quite early in the Particle story, didn't it?
That's right. Yeah. It's expanded a lot in terms of what it does. So if we go back to like the delivery of Spark Core in 2014, that product was, I've got one somewhere. Where do I have one? I like this one because this is the white PCB, and like no one should ever, if anybody ever thinks, I should make a white PCB, don't make a white PCB. You're going to regret it. But this came with basically a web IDE, which is sort of a web version of Arduino, and an API. And so you could basically send in messages remotely to it, and you could send code to it. And that was kind of it, right? That has expanded dramatically over 10 years. We now articulate it online as we've got like 29 different subcomponents of the platform, which, each one of which is a rabbit hole that we could spend an hour on. But what we realized is that the scope, the depth and breadth of the tech stack for an IoT product are both a lot, right? So you end up needing to like both become a really deep expert in how cellular networking actually works. Not at the level that you think it does when you're using an iPhone or an Android where it's abstracted by the operating system, but like actually under the hood, how cellular networks work. There's a lot of stuff there. At one, you have to go that level of depth, but you also have to do that across embedded systems, across communication protocols, encryption at every different layer of the stack, web services. It's a ton of stuff to build. And so the scope of our platform just keeps getting bigger and bigger because our goal has been to do it all, right? What we want to say to somebody is, look, the whole tech stack, it's just there. It just works out of the box. And we're 10 years in. I think we finally got there like last year, where I could reasonably say to somebody, this is the entire tech stack that you need to create an IoT product, except for the application. The front end, it's very much like our customers build the thing that their users touch, and we just do all the infrastructure behind the scenes. So that's how we describe ourselves: edge to cloud infrastructure. The scope of what we do is broader than anybody else because we've been building it out for 10 years, and a lot of aspects of our platform are very hardened by having been in market for that long, right? So like over-the-air software updates, probably the most important individual feature of what we do. We're really good at like reliably and securely delivering software updates to a microcontroller. We do 12 million updates a month across thousands of different types of applications. And so that's been going on for 10 years. So as you can imagine, that system's pretty reliable and robust now. So you can trust it because it's been out for such a long time and has been beaten up in every possible way that anybody could try to break this thing. So
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And as you mentioned at the very start of this interview, some of these systems that require robustness are doing things like monitoring oil fields and doing actual real, quite serious work out there in the world. So it's one of those things where you're not putting together a service and hoping it stays together. You really have to actually make sure that all of the pipes are absolutely well connected without any leaks, for want of a better metaphor.
If you are deploying a methane sensor into the Permian Basin in Texas, which is about as far from anywhere else as you could be, and it breaks and you have to send somebody out, you have to send out a truck to go fix something, that sucks.
Yeah, that's a costly issue.
and those are the kinds of customers that use Particle. And so a lot of people start with Particle with the thing on their desk, right? Like if you have a thing on your desk and it gets borked, right? You just like press the reset button, you're fine. But we want it to be that you're doing the same thing when you're working on your desk that you'll do when you deploy it into a place that you will never be able to go a second time. And so we have to make it that level of secure, scalable, reliable from the first moment, so that there's never like a transition path you're going through from that first prototype into large scale production.
For sure, yeah. And of course, I mean, for the engineers listening, this is all things that will be incredibly kind of important to hear, because from an engineering point of view, things need to be trusted when you're going to scale. And as you say, one of the ideas behind the Tachyon is that this isn't something you'll necessarily will have one of in your business. You'll be able to deploy many of these to do many different things. And again, from an engineer's perspective, you do have Ubuntu as your main software, but there is also the option of complete rolling your own using Yocto Linux, as it says on the Kickstarter page. But jumping to the other end of the spectrum just for a moment, I think one of the things about this board that will be very interesting is that it's one of the first complete packages that will run in a sort of familiar way to hobbyists. But that is offering a lot of new things. So from someone like my perspective, for example, I'm a self-taught engineer. I've been fumbling with microcontrollers for the best part of 15 years in the hope that I'll make them do something, and occasionally I do. But if I was to get my hands on a Tachyon and wanted to kind of do my own, basically teach myself IoT from the ground up. How does that work for someone who maybe isn't in enterprise, who maybe doesn't want to put a huge amount of money into using an online platform? Because presumably there's some level of being able to use this, use the service, and be able to even maybe use some level of 5G connectivity without having to pay a massive amount of fee to begin with. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's important that we, when we think about prototype to production, this is something we think about a lot, right? What you need in production and what you need in prototype are similar but different, right? In prototyping, what you're looking for is affordability, accessibility, ease of use, basically developer productivity, right? Yeah. So like I think like I have a job to do. I'm trying to build a thing that does a thing. And I want to be able to do that quickly and have as few barriers in my way. And I also probably have some tools and systems that I'm familiar with. And so there are some cases where like, when you build something abstracted, if it's not abstracted in the way that the user expects it to be abstracted, the work that you did to try to make something easier can make it harder, right? Because you're like, well, I'm expecting to write in Python and this system requires that I write it in JavaScript or something like that, right? That kind of thing can kill developer productivity, even if it's comes from the right place. So that's the lens we look at prototyping. And then we look at production and we think, what do you need? You need scalability, security, reliability are sort of like the fundamentals of enterprise services. Auditability, right? Like you need to know that like, oh, somebody pushed a software update. Who pushed the software update to that thing, right? These are things that like companies care about that individuals do not care about. And so we have to do both of those things, right? We have to have it be secure, scalable, reliable, auditable, and also, accessible, affordable, easy to use, high productivity, right? And we have to do all of that always, because a great way to screw up a large scale deployment is to force a transition that means all the good work that you did early on gets dropped and like the implementation is wrong. And that means that the system isn't actually reliable, secure, whatever, right? So that's the approach that we take. And so what that means for an individual person using this as for a hobby project is platform's free for first 100 devices. We include free telemetry over the cellular network. So if you're doing like it has a SIM card in there, if you just want to use the SIM card for like remotely triggering a script or getting basic like metrics out of it, like CPU utilization and stuff like that, that's free. Like we're not going to charge for that. And then if you want a gigabyte scale plan, so you can actually send information, like, real stuff over the cellular network, that's a 2 gig plan for $6.99 a month. So, trying to make it as affordable as we can for folks who are building it for whatever application they're building on. And then you go to scale, and then we're going to charge for the cloud service and things like that. But I think that if you don't have an intent to scale, look, the reality is we use this stuff to generate business for ourselves. So like we want to make people love our product and then use it. And if you're doing it for early development, you get to take advantage of that, right? Like if you don't have any aspiration to grow, don't worry about it. That's fine. Like we love to have as many people building whatever they want on this thing. We want to democratize these technologies and make it so that anybody can use them. And we're excited about whatever people are building on it, regardless of whether it's something that has intent to scale. And you know what? A lot of our best customers, they scaled, but they didn't necessarily have that intent out of the gate, right? A lot of great products start as hobby projects that somebody realizes is maybe worth doing something about and building a business around.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think that's a great attitude to have, because at the end of the day, people who, learn to love to use tools and use those tools well, occasionally make very wonderful things. And if they've had the opportunity to get to know their tools, then they're going to stick with those tools. I think it's a very good attitude to have. Yeah.
And importantly, I think it's as important that we not force anybody to use those tools, right? So like we have a agent on the device that provides connectivity back to the cloud service. You want to turn it off, you can uninstall it. We're running Ubuntu because we want to create a really great out-of-box experience, and we think Ubuntu is a really good like default, but a lot of people have their own preferred Linux, or they might want to run Android or Windows 11 on it. It does support those. You want to do one of those, you can wipe it and put whatever you want on there. And so we're not going to force anybody to use the systems the way that we intend for them to use. We hope that you'll try it, and we hope that you'll like it. And if you don't, we'll make it better. But we're not going to force anybody to do things in the Particle way if that's not their match.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, one of the things I always find very fascinating when anything like this comes out is I wonder what people will end up using the Tachyon for, which is not its intended market whatsoever, just because of the fact that, like we mentioned at the very start of the interview, it's a quite unique setup in terms of its hardware. And having a stable Ubuntu on top of that hardware, I think, will be something that a lot of hobby hackers would find interesting, even with no aspirations of actually taking it out in the field and turning it into a cellular IoT device.
It's definitely something we've learned from the microcontroller world, where if we go back to when we launched cellular, which we did in 2015, we were already doing Wi-Fi connected products. So we had a sense for like what kinds of things people were building. And we built cellular because we knew that there were a bunch of things that you might want to do that are outside of the home or an office. So like, okay, if you're doing, if you're doing a vehicle, right, like you need a cellular connection because it's going to be out in the world. So we thought this is about mobile and remote. And then in practice, you see what people do. And yes, that's true. There are a lot of mobile and remote applications as a big part of what people use our cellular stuff for. But also, then you find stuff that's like in a factory that is connected to the cellular network, and it's a fixed asset, doesn't move. And you say, well, why is that cellular connected? Well, you learn that turns out, any factory environment, there's some IT guy who is responsible for figuring out what goes on his network. And
not on my network.
Guaranteed, he looks at like IoT things and he says, nope. And now you might say, well, but some IoT devices are secure. Particle powered IoT devices are secure. If we know that it's powered by Particle, then he trusts it. No, this person does not trust anybody because he or she, they have been, they have trusted things in the past and they regret it and they've been burned. And so like they will not let IoT devices on their network. So a lot of things end up then going to the cellular network and saying, you know what, we need connectivity. We'll just use cellular. And those are things we learn. We don't know that stuff before we launch these products. And Tachyon's it's gonna give us a lot of new ideas, and we're gonna discover things about what people are building. And we're already starting to see that now, just in the first couple of weeks. Like it will be used for things that we didn't intend for it to be used for, and that's my favorite part of this whole thing.
For sure, yeah. And as I mentioned earlier on in this interview, the Kickstarter is well underway, and at the time of recording this interview, things have gone quite well with it. I think you've jumped a good $240,000 over the original target, but there is still a few days left on the Kickstarter campaign, and so of course people can get involved and get the pre-orders in. And am I right with my memory of thinking that the rough given date for delivery is around about January?
Yes, that's right. So first, like the early bird orders will go out in January, and then February for the remainder. So this stuff will all be shipping out early next year.
Absolutely. All right. Well, as I mentioned on the previous show, this is the first time in a while that a single board computer has really got me kind of quite excited. I'm certainly excited to get my hands on one and have a little play with it. But is there anything, any last bits you'd like to add about the Tachyon before we move on?
I think the big thing I threw out there is a little bit of a call for innovation. Like we really want to know what people want to do with this thing that's kind of outside the boundaries. And so if you've got something you want to build and it is like wildly crazy, we would love to hear from you and know what you want to work on and figure out what we can do to make that easier. Because our job fundamentally is about taking hard problems and making them easier. That's a lot of infrastructure in this context, right? A lot of things that are necessary to get this stuff working, we want to eliminate so you can just go build whatever great product you're going to build. But what you need from us is different depending on what kind of thing you're trying to build. So if you're trying to build a crazy robot that is going to do all sorts of autonomous things, or you're trying to, build some new application for, some new thing with cameras that no one's ever thought of before, come talk to us. Obviously back the campaign, but tell us what you're working on and tell us what we can do to make your life easier.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And those links, of course, as to how you can get in touch with Particle will be in the description of this show video or wherever this ends up getting posted. Zach, thank you so much for giving me some of your time today.
Cool. Likewise. Thanks, Ian.
So that was Zach, and I hope you enjoyed watching that interview as much as I enjoyed giving it. I really got on well with Zach, and we will definitely be talking to him again in the future in one way or another. We actually talked for another further 20 minutes or so after we finished that little condensed interview, and I'll release that separately at some point in some way, maybe on the podcast or something like that. As I mentioned in the video, all of the links that are relevant will be under this video. The link to the ongoing Kickstarter, where they've already absolutely smashed their goal. There are still some of the early bird versions of it left. You can still see the super early bird Tachyon for $149. There are still 130 of those if you're interested in getting in on the ground floor and getting a cheaper version of it, and you will also be the first to get your hands on it if you do. If you'd like to find out more about Particle in general, I've linked to their website in the description of this video too, and further down on this Kickstarter page, just one extra recommendation. There is a video from their chief technical officer, basically just going through what sensor data is like, sensor data collection and management is like using the Tachyon, which is of course very important for something which is a cellular IoT device. That's mainly what they do. They have sensor data, and that data is put up into the cloud, and then various things can happen based on that data, and of course various things can happen back on the site with the workings from the cloud. We've talked about this many times before, but being able to change hardware from the cloud and being able to change the cloud from the hardware. It's sort of what Particle do top to bottom. So yeah, as I said before, I hope you enjoyed that interview. It took up a fair chunk of this week's show, but it's not all of it, because we do still have a very exciting thing to talk about, which is our product of the week. Just a quick reminder that if you would like to support the Electromaker show, the best way that you can do so is by visiting electromaker.io/shop and seeing if anything from the thousands upon thousands of products we have, from everyone from Raspberry Pi to Arduino to Nordic Semiconductor to everything from Adafruit and Sparkfun and Pimoroni and much more, if any of that appeals to you, that money directly financially supports what we do. We don't run any adverts on YouTube, we don't run any sponsorships on our podcast, we entirely fund ourselves via our own shop. That said, if you are here on YouTube, it would mean a lot if you could make sure you have subscribed to this channel, make sure that you have clicked like on this video if you like it, of course, and leave a comment on the video saying what you like about it, what you don't like about it, or more importantly, what are you working on right now? I love hearing what people are trying to get done. I have been trying to build a synthesizer for literally years now, and I have bits and pieces all over in different spots where I've tried different things, so many different code bases just trying to make digital synthesis. I'm really interested to hear what's the projects that you're in process of doing, and of course, once they're finished, stick them on the Electromaker Project Hub, and then I'll talk about them in the show. Anyway, let's get on with said show. We're going to talk now about our product of the week, and that is the LoRaWAN Starter Kit from Blues. Now, I'm going to keep it relatively brief because I've said so many times the same thing about Blues, and the same thing's true here as far as I can understand. Blues' workflow is the easiest way to get into pretty much any kind of connectivity for your hardware project. Whether it's cellular IoT or Wi-Fi, and now LoRaWAN or even satellite, you have note cards that can talk in various different ways across various different networks, and you talk to them all the same way, and that is via JSON JSON commands. The Blues LoRaWAN Starter Kit, however, comes with a hub and various different LoRaWAN nodes that allow you to place them throughout an entire space and have them communicate with each other, and only need the hub as the single point of reference to connect to the wider internet or whatever you wish to do with that data, which obviously has various advantages in various different places where perhaps you can't or do not want cellular IoT connectivity, or there's a million and one reasons why you want different kinds of radios. And from my perspective, the fact that Blues are making a LoRaWAN kit would be enough for me to consider getting one anyway because of my experience of getting up and running with the Blues Note Card Starter Kit. That was the cleanest and smoothest cellular IoT experience I've ever had. But anyway, this is a product of the week, so you don't need to take my word for it. We of course have our in-house engineer and gadget guru, Robin Mitchell, to take you through everything you need to know. So, as always, I will leave it to Robin to go through all of the technical details of what the Blues Starter Kit for LoRaWAN can do and some of the use cases you might have for it. One of the things that I was interested in, having been so amazed by Blues's documentation for getting started, would be if I was to have one of these right now and I wanted to set up a LoRaWAN network in my house, how easy would it be and how flexible is it? Because it's all well and good having these LoRaWAN nodes, but if you're already using LoRaWAN and you have your own gateway, for example, does Blues force you to use their own gateway? Well, the answer is, of course, no. And in fact, just having a quick look at the quick start guide, connecting to a LoRaWAN gateway, as always, they have these wonderful charts showing you exactly how everything works. If you do use the Blues gateway, it removes one level of complexity for you because they manage absolutely everything. This is working on the Things stack from the Things network, one of many LoRaWAN networks that you can choose. And so if you have the Note Card LoRa, which is API compatible with the cellular IoT Note Card they have and the Wi-Fi IoT, it's a JSON API. I say that over and over again. If you can format JSON with your microcontroller or your single board computer, and there are many libraries that help you do it, you can use any Note Card in any situation. It connects to the Blues gateway and then goes to the Things stack, the Blues app server and the Blues Note Hub, as we've talked about in the past. This is Blues's what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, it's hot. I'm losing words. It's too hot. This is Blues's secure end-to-end way of talking between your hardware and the cloud. They do all of the encryption stuff for you, and then they can put it onto your cloud, as it says, whether that's AWS, Google Drive, or a myriad of other things. However, if you already have a LoRaWAN gateway, you can spin up your own thing. All you need to do is get the LoRaWAN gateway working, set up your network server, have your own packet broker, and then you end up in the Blues app server and in the Note Hub and to the cloud. So there's a couple of extra steps, but of course, if you already have your own LoRaWAN hub, I would imagine you'd be quite familiar with sorting that kind of thing out. The Blues hub can connect via Ethernet or Wi-Fi, but I'm not going to go into too much more detail, again, because this is why Robin has made our wonderful product of the week. I was just curious to see how easy it would be to get started, and this, by the way, is one of my favorite things. Ignore the unsupported browser thing. I use a special version of Brave for doing the show. My experience of using this on various different devices has been out of the box plug and play. This is a terminal inside the browser. You can plug in your Note Card and actually get started with it without having any SDK stuff on your side at all. In fact, you could theoretically do all of the programming of any Note Card you ever use just through the browser if you know what you want it to do, because again, it's JSON commands. If you want to say, wake up and send a message from this sensor every 15 minutes, and that's all you ever wanted to do, then you never need to install an SDK, which is wild and wonderful. Anyhow, I highly recommend checking out the video from Robin here. It goes through everything you need to know about the LoRaWAN kit, and of course the article as well goes through it all in text as well. And if you'd like to find out more about it, you can head to this blog here. It'll be linked in the description of this video. The purchase link is the first one right at the top here, and from the purchase link you can click the Getting Started guide, which can take you to all the same documentation I have just been speaking so highly of. And there are various other useful links throughout every product of the week video as well if you're interested in finding out more. So yes, I'm going to pretty much leave it there. I have had nothing but a positive experience with Blues. If you are someone who is interested in getting into LoRaWAN, would you be tempted by this Blues kit? And perhaps more importantly, if you are someone who's already been working with the LoRaWAN network for quite some time, taking a look at what Blues is doing, what are your opinions on it? Because I always find that from my perspective, it's very easy for me to get very excited about things that are easy to use because I have so little time. And if I want to get something up and running, as much as I love getting in the weeds, getting as close to the bare metal as possible as a hobbyist, if I really wanted to achieve something, barrier to entry is important. But I'm very interested in hearing your thoughts on the matter. And as this is a product of the week, yes, we will be giving away a Blues LoRaWAN Starter Kit. The competitions here at Electromaker are incredibly simple. All you need to do to enter them is be subscribed to this YouTube channel, the Electromaker YouTube channel, and leave a comment on this video saying what you would build if you did win a Blues LoRaWAN Starter Kit. And also leave the hashtag BluesLoRa, Blues LORA, no spaces, which will allow us to see all the competition entries and filter out any repeat entries. The winners will be chosen at random and announced on the next Electromaker show, so you have plenty of time in order to put those in, as there probably will not be a show coming out next week as I am going away, although there may be. But yes, either next week or the week after, we will be announcing the winner of that competition. For now, get entering, let me know what you'd make with it. Good luck. That was our show for this week. Thank you so much for joining me. In fact, if this show went out when I expected it did, this is the second show for this week. So that was our show again for this week. Apologies for the bunched up shows at the minute. Life is rather busy and I'm about to be going away, which means that in a little while, you'll probably be getting another one of those shows where Ian finds himself in a forest with a camera, but still dressed like this. And instead of the Attic of Dreams, we change it for the Forest of Dreams, but talk about exactly the same stuff. I'm very much looking forward to doing that. This weekend, I will be running the ultra marathon I ran last weekend once again. I didn't want to make as much of noise about it as I did last time because I am not personally making any fundraising pledges or anything this time round, although I personally will be donating to the 40k before 40 charitable running, well, it's not a running charity, it is a person doing charitable acts in the name of running, and lots of people are taking part in it. This is someone I do not know personally, but comes from the northeast of England, close to where I do, who are also raising money for Mind, the mental health charity in the UK, and I will be leaving a link under this video. The first link you will see will be to their Just Giving page. If you would like to support me as Ian from Electromaker in my ultramarathon, I would direct you to support them financially, as they are supporting the same charity I did last time, a charity that has helped me immeasurably over the years. I would not be who I am now, or perhaps even still here, if it were not for them. And if you read the reasoning behind 40k behind 40, you will, before 40, you will realize that that is something that is very close to my own heart as well. Anyway, that was a rather long and strangely emotional outro, but thank you for your time. I'm very much looking forward to chatting to you next time. I'll probably have some quite tired legs, but for now I hope you have a fun, safe and creative week, and I'll chat to you soon.